sure it was totally my fault, but the reading that Andrea read was actually chapter 2, and I had meant chapter 1. So I'm going to read from verse 2 from chapter 1, which fits into the theme. I'm sure it's my dyslexia. Absolutely, Andrea. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develop perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all, without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord, because he is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. The man in humble circumstances ought to take pride of his high position. But the one who is rich should take pride in his low position, because he will pass away like the wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich man will fade away, even while he goes about his business. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. May God bless his reading to us. I'm going to talk about prayer and perseverance in particular. There's lots of lovely stories about perseverance. One I like, particularly like, is one by a lady called Bess Nesbitt. And she was a secretary of a bank in Dallas. And in 1951, she earned $300 as her salary every year, which was a very respectable salary at that time. One of the small irritations she had in life was having to correct her own mistakes and having to retype the pages. And she was an artist, and in her own work as an artist, she would just paint over her mistakes. And so he came up with the idea to paint over her mistakes. And it's what eventually led to Tipp-Ex, the little white fluid. So she made a little fluid, and she made it in our kitchen sink. And very soon, all the ladies all the secretaries in the bank were using this mistake out, they call it. And she tried to sell it to some of the big businesses, and nobody had any interest in it. But the secretaries kept encouraging her. So she saved up $200, and she paid a chemist to develop a faster drying solution. And so she now had something that dried a bit faster, and she tried again to sell it, and nobody was interested in it. So eventually, she bit the bullet, she gave up her job, and she took to the road selling this mistake out. She formed a paper liquid company. In 1959, which was 8 years later, when she sold it, the little bottles of mistake out were selling for $3.5 million a year. And when she sold it to the Gillette Company for $47 million. You can look her up on the internet. There's lots of wonderful stories, and she is a painter. It was persistence, sticking with something that she believed in. And it's a story that goes with lots of, particularly scientists. There were many scientists like Louis Pasteur, Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein. They come up with the same thing: 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration or perseverance. And the Bible is full of words like perseverance, encouragement, and they often describe the gift that God gives us. And I'm going to look at the passage from James in particular, and I'm going to look at three words from it: perseverance, prayer, and peace. which are treated themes from that, no matter what is happening in our lives. Now, when you preach about prayer, it's as many preachers say, it's like one poor beggar telling another beggar where to find food. And there's a challenge, but there is a challenge of, is there anything that you pray for every single day that you persevere in? Is there anything that you pray for every single day? I pray for my daughter and my grandchildren. And one of the things I pray for every single day that I pray for them is I give thanks that they were all safely born. Because we had a history where that wasn't, we had two babies who died quite young. And so for the last many years, is 34, 35 years, every time I pray for Michelle, I just give thanks that she was safely born. I do the same with my grandchildren. She's expecting another child now, and I pray every single day for the safety and the safe birth of that. We don't take it for granted. But it's persevering in what God would have us. I'm going to talk about perseverance first, as the first of the three. If I was to ask you to name the American presidents, you might get every one in the last few years. There's a whole lot you probably wouldn't get. But I think somewhere in there, Abraham Lincoln would come up as one of the few of the older ones you might remember. He was one of two presidents. There used to be a national day. It's now called President's Day in February each year in America, but there used to be a single day for Abraham Lincoln. But a few facts about Abraham Lincoln. He failed in his business in 1831. He was defeated in his first election in 1832. He failed in his second business the following year, 1833. His fiancée died at just 26 in 1834. 2 years later, he had a nervous breakdown in 1836. He was defeated as a candidate for Speaker in 1838. He was defeated as a candidate for elector in 1840. He was defeated as a candidate for Congress in 1843 and 1848. He's done a lot of failing. He was defeated as a candidate for the Senate in 1855. He was defeated for the Vice Presidency in 1858. And he was elected President of the USA in 1860. What kept him going? He persevered because he had no fear of failing. He kept failing and he kept getting up. And persevering is failing 19 times, getting up and passing on the 16th or succeeding on the 20th. And there's similar stories for many of our Christian missionaries. If you look at John Wesley's diary, I forgot to write down the year, I think it was 1745, I forgot to write down the year, but it was in May. On the Sunday morning on the 5th of May, he preached in St. Anne's, and he was asked not to come back anymore. That afternoon, he preached in St. John's, and the deacons told him to get out and stay out. The following Sunday, May the 12th, he preached in St. Jude's, and he wasn't allowed to return there again. That afternoon of the 12th, he preached in St. George's, and he was asked to leave. The following week, May the 19th, he preached on the street, and he was asked to move on by the local constabulary. That afternoon, he preached in a meadow, and a local farmer released a bull into the field, turned it loose during the service. During the second, the following Sunday, he preached on the edge of town, and he was chased off the roadway. That afternoon, he preached in a pasture, and 10,000 people came to hear him. And we hear about the successes and really big meetings he had, but of all those big meetings, there was the journey to get there. It didn't just happen. He travelled many miles, he was ejected many times, but he persevered because he had something worth persevering for. The author, Irving Stone, he wrote novels about famous people, artists, scientists, and he wrote about their lives. And he said one thing that he found in common about these men is they all had, I write about people who sometime in their lives have a vision or a dream of something that could only be accomplished. That should they be accomplished, of something that should be accomplished, and they work at it. They're beaten over, things go wrong, but they stick with it. And by the end of their lives, they have achieved something, maybe not at all, something of what they set out to achieve. But dreams can only happen if you do something about them today. And stories like John Wesley's or Beth Nesbitt's can be inspiring, but sometimes it can feel far away from where we are. But there is still the sense of, what is it that's important in your life? That's important in your prayer? That's worth persevering for? That's worth praying for every single day? The context of James's passage is trials and tribulations, when things are not going well. And for some of us, that may be not having a job, it could be failing an exam, it could be a child who's on drugs, it can be so many things. It's different for each of us. But whatever our situation, God calls us to persevere through the situation. And that's where prayer comes in. Because prayer is often the key to perseverance. It's a sense that we're not on our own, that there's something else there. So if I talk about prayer, the context of the passage in James, right in the middle of it, it's right in the middle of it, says, if you ask for wisdom, God will grant it. In my business life, I don't think there's ever a major decision I didn't ask for wisdom for. And there's a sense of trusting that God will give you the direction that you need. In Luke's Gospel, where we talk about the Lord's Prayer, it talks about ask and you shall receive. But you have to ask. There's a lovely story from Henry Ford. He had a friend, a lifelong friend, who was an insurance man. And when he retired, when Henry Ford retired, his friend asked him, why is it, in all the years that we've been friends, you never give me any business? And Henry Ford looked at him and he said, you never asked. And there's a sense we must not fall into the trap of not asking God for the things we want to do for God, or the things we want to do in life. There's a sense in which God has said, ask and it will be given. Seek and you will find. If you look for wisdom, ask for wisdom and just believe. And it's one of those promises that I keep coming back to because it's a promise of Scripture. It's the Word of God for you. The reading from St. James's letter is really saying that prayer really works. And you think of the size of the universe. You think of the God who made this universe. And we, in our simple lives, the idea that we would pray and God would do something because we are praying seems incredible. And that is the majesty of God. If you lack wisdom, ask God and He will give it to you. But don't doubt like a wave of the sea. Woody Allen used to say, 90% of life is just showing up. Now, I misquote him all the time and I say, 90% of prayer is just showing up. It's just being there. It's just coming to the table. 90% of prayer is just being there. It's not always what you say, but it's being to where God is. I was once asked, I was circus steward for about 6 years, and I was handing over to somebody else, and I was asked to draw up a list of duties. And so I drew up the big list, and what you do this, and all the mechanics of it. And at the end, I put in prayer for the minister in particular. But I realised then, actually, it's the first thing you do. And so I reordered the list to put prayer at the top, because it was the most important thing that the circus steward should do. And so the question is, what do you pray for? And that's the challenge. And not just what do you pray for, but what do you persevere in prayer? Because the key to prayer is perseverance. It's staying with it. It's the widow coming to the looking for a loaf of bread from the judge, or looking for judgment from the judge, and keep coming. And then the last point was peace. And I put that in because of James, the verse 4 in James. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. And not lacking in anything, to me, is a bit like being at peace. It's being at peace with yourself, but being at peace with the world. There's when the big suspension bridges, like the Golden Gate in San Francisco, it's built when they design it. They have to think of three loads. They have to think of the dead load, the live load, and the wind load. The dead load is the weight of the bridge itself. The dead load is the weight of the traffic on top of the bridge, and the wind load is any storm. And so when you design a bridge, you have to think of the worst conditions, the heaviest the bridge is going to be, the heaviest the traffic is going to be on it, so you fill it up with articulated trucks, and the strongest wind you're likely to receive. And that's that's how you design it. But our lives are very much the same as that. The dead load is what we carry around, our personalities, etc. The live load is whatever trouble we're having, whether it's one of our friends or our children is in trouble, or whether it's ourselves, whether it's all sorts of things. And then the live load, that's the live load. And then the wind load is when something really goes wrong. So you have your normal life, you're struggling with this or that, and then something really, really goes wrong. The house catches fire. Somebody gets knocked over, whatever it happens to be. But if you take that picture, if you can pray, it's like putting another steel girdle in the bridge. It's strengthening it up even more than it is. And that's what prayer does. It makes us stronger. It makes us stronger in our personal lives. My final two illustrations are about a swimmer called Florence Chadwick. She was the first lady to swim the English Channel in both directions. But I want to take one particular. She tried to swim from Catalina Island off the coast of California to California. It's a 21-mile stretch. It's shark-infested waters, and she was lucky to be the first woman to swim that. So she went into the water. It was a very foggy morning, but less than half a mile from the coast, she had to be dragged from the sea in the rescue boat that was following up because of fatigue. And she said the problem was she couldn't see the land. She couldn't see the coast. She said, I would have made it if I could see the coast. So she tried it again 7 months later, 2 months later. And this time she was successful. It was still a very foggy morning, but this time she kept a picture of the coast in her mind. And there's a sense in wherever we struggle with, keeping a picture of Christ in our minds. That's what we're persevering for. That's what we're struggling for. The last illustration then is Eamon Coughlin. Certainly I grew up with Eamon Coughlin on the television winning races. And he was particularly good on the indoor circuit. And in '87, I had just started my first job. He was running in Minneapolis on the indoor mile. He was the indoor mile champion at the time. He was running the heats, the semi-final heats. And he was running along smoothly, and somebody tripped him. And he went down. And it was like a scene from Chariots of Fire. He got up, he chased after the pack. And it was only a qualifying race, so he just needed to be in the top three. He eased to the front of the front three. He looked around. There was nobody coming on his shoulder, and he physically relaxed And just at the post, at the line, somebody passed him on the inside. He relaxed. He took his mind off the prize. And so often we take our mind off what it's about. And it's about honouring God. It's about honouring Jesus. It's about asking for the Holy Spirit. And it's that sense. Hebrews 12 verse 1. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Perseverance. The key to peace in our lives is prayer. The key to prayer is perseverance, staying with it. And the key to perseverance is keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. Again, to misquote Woody Allen, 90% of prayer is just showing up. It's just being there.